In Part 1, we laid the groundwork for understanding how fundamentally different human civilization would have been. Now we're diving into the specific ways that major historical events, technological developments, and cultural achievements would have unfolded under female leadership. And let me tell you, some of these scenarios are so radically different from what we know that they'll make you question everything you thought you understood about human history. Let's start with the big one: warfare and conquest. In our timeline, human history is basically a never-ending series of wars, invasions, and territorial expansion driven by male leaders obsessed with dominance and glory. But imagine if the great empires of antiquity had been led by women who prioritized diplomacy, trade, and cultural exchange over military conquest. We might have seen a completely different model of civilization expansion. Take the Roman Empire, for example. Instead of the brutal military machine that conquered most of the known world through violence and intimidation, imagine a female leading Rome that expanded through economic partnerships, cultural influence, and diplomatic alliances. The Pax Romana might have been an actual peace rather than the enforced submission we know from history. Cities might have joined the empire voluntarily, attracted by the benefits of Roman infrastructure, education, and trade networks. But here's what makes this scenario so fascinating. The technological innovations would have been completely different. Instead of perfecting siege warfare, military engineering, and weapons technology, Roman women might have focused on aqueducts, sewage systems, medical facilities, and educational institutions. The engineering marvels that survive from the Roman era might have been hospitals and schools rather than colosseums and fortifications. The religious evolution under female leadership would have been mind-blowing. Instead of the sky god religions that dominated much of human history, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, all with their emphasis on divine authority and masculine imagery. We might have seen earth goddess religions that emphasize nurturing, healing, and the cycles of life. The concept of a wrathful, punishing deity might never have developed. Imagine Christianity emerging from a female-dominated Jewish culture, instead of a religion focused on sacrifice, suffering, and redemption through violence. We might have seen a spiritual system emphasizing healing, compassion, and the celebration of life. The crucifixion might never have happened because the political and social dynamics that led to it wouldn't have existed in a female-dominated society. But let's talk about the Islamic expansion, because this shows you how different conflict resolution would have been. Instead of the rapid military conquests that spread Islam across North Africa and into Europe, imagine female Muslim leaders spreading their faith through trade, scholarship, and cultural exchange. The great libraries and universities of the Islamic world might have been even more magnificent, focusing on medicine, philosophy, and the arts rather than military strategy. The Mongol Empire presents a particularly interesting case. In our timeline, the Mongols were the ultimate expression of male-dominated warrior culture, brutal, efficient, and focused on conquest through terror. But imagine if Genghis Khan had been a woman. Mongol expansion might have been driven by trade and cultural exchange rather than warfare. Instead of leaving trails of destruction across Asia, the Mongols might have created the world's first truly global communication and trade network. Here's where it gets really interesting. The technological development would have followed completely different paths. Instead of the military innovations that drove much of human technological progress, you might have seen earlier breakthroughs in medicine, agriculture, and social organization. The printing press might have been invented centuries earlier to spread knowledge about healing and education, rather than religious propaganda and military manuals. The Renaissance would have been absolutely incredible under female leadership. Instead of the male-dominated artistic and intellectual movement we know, imagine a Renaissance driven by women who prioritized collaboration, interdisciplinary thinking, and the integration of art, science, and social reform. The great works of the Renaissance might have been focused on improving human welfare rather than glorifying individual achievement and patron power. Leonardo da Vinci's female equivalent might have focused on medical innovations, educational techniques, and social engineering rather than military fortifications and weapon designs. The notebooks of this alternative genius would have been filled with designs for hospitals, schools, and systems for improving public health, rather than tanks and flying machines designed for warfare. The age of exploration would have been completely different. Instead of the brutal colonization and exploitation that characterized European expansion, female leaders might have approached the Americas, Africa, and Asia, with genuine curiosity and respect for indigenous cultures. The exchange of knowledge, crops, and technologies might have been truly mutual rather than extractive. Imagine if the Spanish conquistadors had been women. Instead of destroying the Aztec and Inca civilizations, female explorers might have been fascinated by their achievements in astronomy, agriculture, and social organization. The result might have been a genuine fusion of European and indigenous knowledge rather than the cultural genocide we know from history. The colonial period would have been radically different. Instead of the exploitation, slavery, and resource extraction that characterized European colonialism, female leaders might have established genuine partnerships with indigenous peoples. The wealth that flowed back to Europe might have come from trade and cultural exchange rather than theft and forced labor. But here's what's really twisted about this alternative history. The scientific revolution would have been far more advanced. Instead of the compartmentalized, competitive approach to knowledge that characterized much of scientific development, female scientists might have approached research more holistically and collaboratively. The integration of different fields of knowledge might have led to breakthrough discoveries centuries earlier. The Industrial Revolution under female leadership would have been fascinating. Instead of the brutal, exploitative factory system that characterized early industrialization, women might have prioritized worker welfare, environmental protection, and sustainable production methods. The technological innovations might have been focused on improving quality of life, rather than maximizing production and profit. The political revolutions of the 18th and 19th centuries would have been completely different. Instead of the violent overthrows and power struggles that characterized most revolutionary movements, female leaders might have achieved social change through gradual reform, consensus building, and the creation of more inclusive institutions. The French Revolution might have been a peaceful transition to democracy rather than a bloodbath. The abolition of slavery would have happened much earlier and more completely. Female leaders, with their tendency toward empathy and social justice, might never have allowed the institution of slavery to develop in the first place. The moral arguments against slavery would have been obvious in societies that prioritized human welfare over economic exploitation. The world wars would never have happened. The complex web of alliances, territorial disputes, and national pride that led to the catastrophic conflicts of the 20th century were products of male-dominated political systems. Female leaders, with their emphasis on diplomacy and long-term thinking, might have prevented the conditions that made these wars possible. Instead of the arms races and military-industrial complexes that characterized much of the 20th century, we might have seen international cooperation on a scale that's hard to imagine. The resources that went into weapons development might have been directed toward space exploration, medical research, and environmental protection. The technology of the 20th century would have been incredible. Instead of the focus on weapons and military applications that drove much of technological development, we might have seen earlier breakthroughs in renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, and social technologies. The internet might have been developed decades earlier as a tool for global collaboration rather than military communication. Here's something that shows you how different this world would have been. The concept of environmental protection might have been built into industrial development from the beginning. Female leaders, with their concern for future generations and long-term sustainability, might have prevented the environmental destruction that has characterized much of human industrial activity. The social movements of the 20th century would have been unnecessary. The civil rights movements, women's liberation, and other struggles for equality would never have been needed because the societies, created by female leadership, would have been more egalitarian from the start. The energy that went into fighting for basic rights might have been directed toward even more advanced forms of social progress. The space race would have been a collaborative effort rather than a competition. Instead of the nationalist rivalry that drove the early space program, female leaders might have seen space exploration as a shared human endeavor requiring international cooperation. We might have established permanent bases on the Moon and Mars decades earlier. But here's what's really fascinating about these alternative scenarios. They're not just fantasy. They're based on the real qualities and approaches that women bring to leadership when they have the opportunity. The collaborative, long-term thinking, an emphasis on social welfare that characterize female leadership are unstereotypes. They redocumented patterns that we can observe in contemporary examples. In Part 3, we're going to explore what our world would look like today if this alternative history had unfolded. We'll examine how current global challenges might have been prevented or solved, how technology and society might have evolved, and what we can learn from imagining these alternative paths. Some of these projections will make you wonder if we're living in the worst possible timeline.